Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Single Malt Review. Thanks for catching back up with us. We could not stay away. We have gone back down south of America for another, what we hope to be, a very high quality bourbon. What is it, Dave?
We have here, without further ado, it is my favourite bourbon of all time. In my opinion, the best bourbon there is. It is Rowan's Creek. It is produced by the Kentucky Bourbon Distillers company, who produce other such notable bourbons as sort of Noah's Mill and the like.
I think they've got sort of pure Kentucky and other sort of examples in their stable, and I think they're all more or less pretty well regarded brands there.
It's very strong, bottled at a curious 50.05% ABV, 100.1 proof. Bottled at the old Rowan's Creek distillery, which is not a distillery anymore, but once was.
Which is a little confusing, and I hope it's not intentionally so. Bottled at, not distilled at. This will be distilled, though we don't know exactly where, probably the Bardstown distillery, but it will be distilled at one of the ultimately very few bourbon distilleries that operate in the United States, not including the new wave of craft bourbon distilleries, which we do hope to seize a bottle of at some point, but they have not worked their way down this far, so never mind.
Distilled in Bardstown, taken down the road to Rowan's Creek, and bottled there.
Did it give us an age or a suggestion?
No particular age statement.
No, it will make us guess. Well, based on the colour, colour is actually quite a good tell for bourbon age, because you know that all of the bourbon casks they're aged in are new. They take on colour at a fairly regular rate. So if you end up with a really dark one, it's probably older than not. This one strikes me as your maybe a more average age, which is about 7 years old for quality bourbon. Ones that might not be quite so esteemed might be a bit less. However, this one I think we're looking at a pretty traditional bourbon, based on my deeply unscientific estimation. But anyway, let's see what we've got.
Oh, I need some cut zone there. Fucking snot everywhere. We'll do a quick crossfade into the nosing. We'll cut to a GoPro. Oh god, that's disgusting. Right. Jesus.
So there's the colour there, lovely and rich, and I won't assume it's been coloured, though it may have been chill filtered. The bottle doesn't say, although there's a test I can do. Here's a learning experience for everybody. Let's see what happens when I give it a bit of a shake. Look at that, lovely, lovely foam. No chill filtration. No chill filtration required. That means all the lovely oils and all the lovely body of the whiskey has been left in, which is always a good thing when you're trying to really get the gist of something.
So all those little impurities, would technically be, are what allow those bubbles to nucleate to form in the bottle.
Was I being hyperbolic, I would say that's the soul of the whiskey being left in, rather than being stripped out so that it doesn't go funny colours when people put ice in it, which I think is one of the most tragic reasons for killing a whiskey. But at any rate, there's plenty of other people on the internet which will talk for hours about that subject, and I won't go into it. Myself, I would be simply quite extraneous in any discussion on that at the moment. Anyway, let's stick with the bourbon.
It is a gorgeous, rich, unusually sweet bourbon aroma. Very, very strong. Very
you know
punchy.
what it is? It's extremely gentle. We tasted some Glendronachs a little while ago, and they were, or one of them at least, was 46%, and that one really lit a fire in my nostrils. This, which is not unusual for bourbons, is really, really very smooth.
I find it very strong. It's a strong bourbon aroma, but it's strongly alcoholic. It doesn't have a spirituous burn to it. This has that strong, rich, warm,
it's very rich, and
cloying bourbony aroma.
Very, very typical to bourbon. There's that unmistakable corn. Bourbon, of course, comes in many different forms. Depending on the grain bill, you can get a very wheat-heavy bourbon like Maker's Mark, which is a bit sort of crisper and fresher, and you can get ones with more rye in them, and they will go more in the spicy direction. But this one is unmistakably a corn whiskey, like most bourbons and like traditional bourbon is. And what that brings is this deeply savoury but sweet, like maple syrup on bacon. That's that sort of vector of sensation where something is both rich and sweet, but also nice and savoury at the same time. There is, and it might sound a bit strange, popcorn is what I always get off a good quality bourbon. Lovely, buttery popcorn, which is in no small part from the corn used, but also from the bourbon cask aging, which is a bit of a silly thing to say when you're talking about bourbon, but as whiskey people, as Scotch whiskey people, that's sort of how we keep thinking about it. Bourbon is aged in bourbon casks, which is a completely ridiculous statement to make now that I actually say it out loud, but of course that's where whiskey casks are born in large part. That's where bourbon casks begin their life, but of course they're just freshly charred virgin oak casks when they age their bourbon by law, so reliable in that respect. So yes, anything else? I've got popcorn, a little bit of clove, mace, and just a tiny bit of cinnamon. Less cinnamon than I normally get from bourbon.
I like the maple bacon comparison you made is a good one. I get that. Plus cornflakes and milk to a lesser extent.
No, certainly cornflakes. And then those standbys of vanilla and coconut coming through from that white oak.
I get much less of the coconut, but the vanilla certainly.
So let's see what's on the palate at full strength.
Something I've always admired about Rowan's Creek is that it's so smooth and supple and drinkable at full strength. It's hot, it's warming, but it's just so heavy, syrupy and bourbony.
It's drinkable, just. If there was maybe 1% more in there, I might be flinching. It's very, very full-bodied, which isn't a bad thing. If you're going to drink something strong, then I would recommend bourbon. It's a good thing to have more of, and there isn't that layer of subtlety that you would otherwise be missing out on was it an older Scotch whisky. So if you like your bourbon strong and fiery, then there's nothing wrong with that. You're getting quite a good experience, I think. But this is really just a hair too strong for me. However, I'm not ashamed of that, given that it's just a touch over 50%, so pretty strong stuff on a hot day. However, we might just have the, goodness me, there comes the weather, never mind. We might just have the cure in the form of a couple of ice cubes. Look away if you're one of those people, which is far less of in the bourbon community. It's a bit more relaxing, really.
It is a warm day, and you can get a little nuance of a tiny dash of water, and a good way to add that is just, a single cube of ice.
You will notice I've used a lovely big ice cube. Always use a nice big ice cube, and just one, because that will cool everything down and it will give a little bit of dilution, but it will only do it slowly because you're dealing with such a dramatically reduced surface area, so it can't melt nearly as fast as anything else. And this applies to cocktails as well. Even if you're shaking something up, use nice big cubes. You'll get a good coating there. You'll cool it down. They won't explode in little icy shards, which will end up in your cocktail glass and bring the whole experience down. So there you go. It's a really cheap way of making better drinks.
A little bit of dilution, but not a lot and not quickly. Oh, that's now crisp, and if anything, even sweeter.
The cool now has given it a fresh element that it lacked before. Maybe not lacked, but it didn't possess before. It's now refreshing, in addition to being sweet, in addition to being savoury. It's really turning into a complete package. I can see why this is one of Dave's real all-time favourites. Neither of us are real bourbon junkies. We all have the odd one, but this one really is. We tried an Elijah Craig 12 once before. You can probably find that episode, and though we both enjoyed it, it was definitely this is more. This is bringing more to the table than that one did, which you hope it did, because this one is significantly more expensive than Elijah Craig 12 years old. This is definitely in the premium bourbon spectrum, and it makes no bones about that. You'll have to go to the top shelf to find really all of these brands, I think. So the palate has more nuts. It has a little hazelnut. It has some natural unroasted almond, quite a lot actually. It's almost trying to taste like marzipan, and I'm glad it hasn't gone all the way, because I hate marzipan. But it's that very sweet, very rich almond quality, is so sweet and so rich, it is almost going in that slightly desserty marzipan direction. The popcorn is still there, the vanilla is only more evident as we cool it down and give it a bit more dilution. As Dave said, the coconut is very slight compared to many bourbons, I think because it's such a punchy and sort of a sharp, expressive bourbon. The coconut doesn't have as much room to express itself because it's very, very soft flavour. But
I'm not getting the almonds or marzipan. What I am getting is definitely some sharp, almost bitter nuts like cocoa nibs perhaps, or cocoa nuts. Even if you ever had a raw coconut, it's a special experience. Or even a little bit of cola nut. There's a bit of almost a vanilla Coke thing going on, but in the best possible way.
I can see the cola, although very technically they're beans, but we're not a legume podcast here. So yes, no, there is some cola, and that will happen in bourbons, and it's quite interesting because it will almost never happen in Scotch whisky. It's one of the things bourbon has quite a dominion in. It must come from, therefore, the grain, which would be unsurprising. Rye especially has some really, really quite beguiling flavours that it brings through. If you try a rye whisky, which we will ourselves endeavour to do at some point in the future, it's really quite a kaleidoscopic palette on one of those things. They can be really, really, they can be a bit hard work actually, but fascinating whiskies coming out of grain that has a lot of rye in it. But anyway, let's see if we can find any hangers on here as far as the flavour.
Now that ice cube has melted a little. The whiskey is still strong and punchy, but a little more mellow, possibly even slightly more smooth. That's bringing out some of the sweeter, but also some of the nuttier flavours.
It's still, and this can be said for almost every bourbon, it's compared to Scotch whisky, it's not complex, but it's deeply, deeply satisfying. There's a moorish, satisfying quality. I think the sort of more basic, the more primal flavours of bourbon tap into the human palate in a more of a primal, salivating way. They're closer to foods that we seek out. They're sweet, they're rich, they're savoury, they're not particularly cerebral. They're things we want to taste. They're things our tongues actively are on the hunt for, is why I think bourbon is so easily enjoyable, and easily enjoyable by so many people as well. It really is just something that tastes good. You don't have to think about it. Well, I know your score is going to be a very high one, so I'll go first, so we don't surprise anyone too badly. But it's definitely going to be in the 80s, and I think it's going to be in 83.
Well, I'm going to go to an even higher level. Sure, I've not tasted a lot of bourbons. I've had a few here and there. I think I know what I like. I could find something better than this in future. If I do, I'll be surprised, and I'll certainly enjoy it. But for now, this one rates a 95 on my personal scale. It's a very high score, sure, but it reflects the fact that I enjoy it very, very much.
Well, there you go. Not a score to be trifled with. So, there's another bourbon from us over here. Possibly not the experts, but we do our best at the single malt review. More ironic every time we do one. Never mind. In the meantime, please keep safe. I hope you're having a good new year. I will almost guarantee that we are. We'll have something pretty good just for you around the corner. And maybe not slanger with a bourbon, but howdy, where's the beef? Whatever you like. Ta-ra!